Oh, look, I follow an article to yesterday's or the other day's article about what's her name, Ursula von der Leyen, um, being her aircraft being affected apparently by GPS jamming. Okay, this is rehashing. Now, I'd almost argue that this is now straight up propaganda, not taking a pro-Russia line, but given the statement, okay, so the BBC article from the other day was based on initial reporting by the Financial Times a few days previously, and blah, blah, blah. So there's actually a chain where they're already second, third hand reporting. It's not prime reporting. It's like, okay, well, I've reported what somebody else said, time to move on. Oh no, time to crack out more articles. Despite the fact there were very clear claims, very clear statements in those previous articles. Firstly, by the Russians saying it wasn't us, then by the aviation authorities saying there is no evidence that it was the Russians, and that there are many reasons why this sort of stuff happens, and the fact that there is GPS disruption in and around conflict zones shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. And a clear statement that there has been no evidence that Russians engaged in the jamming. Very, very clear statements that that was the case. But that doesn't stop articles like this appearing by the same news organisation after already publishing those previous articles. Right, so maybe things have changed. So let's have a look. All right, so the difference is we've now got Sweden's air agency, Swedish Transport Agency, sorry, saying that there's been a rise of disruptions, reported rise of disruptions to almost a daily incidents, and that the source of the interference is Russian. And everybody accuses Russia of doing it, and Russia says, nah, I can see why Russia would want to ensure disruption of GPS over its territory, particularly when Ukraine is lobbing cruise missiles against it, particularly Western-sourced cruise missiles that would use GPS guidance. And so disrupting GPS is a means of self-protection, electronic warfare self-protection. Yeah, no, it happens. Right, they're protecting territorial integrity from weapons that are being employed in theatre. That's not that's not an illegal practice. Will that have spillover? Yeah, it's radio frequencies. It has spillover. But okay, whatever. Is it specifically being targeted against air traffic outside of Russia or maritime traffic or other users outside the region? It doesn't look like it. But, yeah, there's statements that may have been throwaway statements. Oh, it's serious and a safety risk for civil aviation. It's well, they're saying that it's spreading in extent. Well, okay, fine, but at the same time, there are more advanced weapon systems being introduced into the Ukrainian theatre that, well, it would be silly for Russia not to do anything to try and prevent their use or their effective use, just as it would be silly for the Ukrainians to not engage in electronic self-protection against GLONASS, which is was the Russian equivalent to GPS. In fact, there's many different GNSS systems out there. So there's GPS, which is American owned. There's GLONASS, which was Russian. I don't know how complete their constellation is. There's Galileo, which is EU based, and again, I'm not sure. I haven't seen for a while how complete their constellations are. There's a Chinese system as well, I forget the name of, and I'm sure that there's other systems out there that are seeking to establish some sort of space-based navigation support system. Okay, so if the Russian weapons were using GLONASS, COSPAS, SARSAT, no, that's search and rescue beacons. Now it's GLONASS. Now, if Russian military hardware was using their GNSS system for guidance, it would make sense for the Ukrainians to ensure that those signals were not being received over Ukraine, so as to degrade the navigational accuracy and therefore the weapon accuracy, the accuracy of those weapons. Fair enough. Self-protection. So again, the question of this now, yep, okay, the correct process is raise it with ICAO and say, look, hey, these things are going on, and ensure that, yep, any disturbances outside the region or to civilian traffic are not ongoing, and there comes a time also when you're calling wolf. I mean, there was accusations for quite a while that the Russians had been complicit in the, well, bombing / rupture of the Nord Stream pipeline running through the Baltic. Well, I don't think many people really believe that. I mean, it was reported quite readily, but I doubt people who thought about it for any length of time really believed that the Russians would bomb that pipeline themselves, especially so far from any Russian territory. Certainly they had very little to gain, in fact nothing to gain from such an action. And there were plenty of people who did have lots to gain who had access to that site in the lead up to the disruption. But anyway, again, the article basically says, claiming, regularly claiming that there are strategies to sow disorder and undermine European security. That, okay, so Moscow denies accusations, and again, no proven link between Russia and the rise in GPS jamming. Okay, so what's the point of the first half of the article then? You've buried it halfway down. It's a repeat of the statement from the previous article, which is there is no proven link. But no, we're going to continue to ramp up the rhetoric. We're continuing to pump up opinion and allegations as truth. People aren't going to read 3/4 of the way down the article to see the line, oh, there's no proven link. They're going to take what's been said and go, oh, this is exactly what's going on, despite the counterclaims, despite the denials, despite the lack of evidence. And, okay, fine. They've even gone back to the Financial Times article again. So now it's the second BBC article pointing back to that previous article. Again, no change. Nothing's changed. I mean, fundamentally nothing's changed in the overall picture. What's changed is the Swedes are now saying, oh, yeah, they're jamming it. All right. Noticeable increase in GPS incidents since the start of 2022, since the invasion of 2022. Again, no one should be surprised by that. No one should be surprised by that. And now you've got this blatant misrepresentation of GPS navigation. This is inflammatory rhetoric that while planes can rely on other forms of navigation than GPS, jamming at mid-flight can increase the risk of collisions, either with other planes or by causing the pilot to unintentionally fly into the ground, water, or other obstacle. Someone's watched too many action movies. Turning GPS off is not going to make a plane fall out of the sky. If it does, the pilots flying it should never have been allowed to become pilots in the first place. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it is GPS provides you. And, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it an inability of the people operating the platform to interpret and understand their systems accurately. It hurts the brain, really. It hurts the brain. And, I mean, even the Civil Aviation Authority, again, it comes back out saying it should not affect the direct navigation of aircraft systems. Yeah, that's true. So you've got some uninformed pearl clutcher saying that the loss of GPS or jamming of GPS is going to cause aircraft to blow up and millions of people to die, when the Aviation Authority is like, well, no, it's one nav system of many, and if it goes offline or is degraded, it should not significantly degrade the performance of the aircraft or the navigation of the aircraft. And trust me, I've looked at integrated GPS nav systems over the years and asked questions about how they are supposed to, and looked into how they're supposed to operate in the denial of space operations, what sort of conditions that would then cause, how that would be recognised in the cockpit, how that should be recognised by people monitoring their systems. All right. Anyway, and the Aviation Authority makes a very fair statement that interference is primarily near conflict zones as a byproduct of military activity rather than necessarily being a deliberate act. Again, buried all the way at the bottom of the article. But it doesn't make news or make a worthwhile article if you put this right at the very top to calm people down. Anyway. What I will say about this statement here, though, if you lose GPS and your navigation systems then revert to other sources of positional accuracy, positional input, your positional accuracy will decrease. That is a given. Now, if you've lost your GPS positional accuracy, and I won't say position, your positional accuracy for any given reason, yes, the spacing between aircraft on air routes or in airspace should be adjusted to reflect that. And yes, if you're not capable of track keeping within certain tolerances, then you will not be granted permission to fly along certain air routes, because the spacing between aircraft and not only going along the same air route, but between different air routes and different levels and things like that, is a reflection of the accuracy of being able to maintain a 3D position in space. GPS is just the latest position keeping tool in the toolkit. And yeah, if people don't notice that that's happened, you're going to go a fair way before proximity alarms start going off, because your GPS is given out. Your system monitoring is people being lazy is what it is. Can you unintentionally fly into the ground, water, or other obstacle because GPS has failed? Well, maybe if you're using a GPS approach into an airfield, but GPS should never have been considered a precision approach in the first place. It will put you into a 3D position in space, but it's not going to put you on a glide path. That's what ILS is for. That's what localizers are for. That's why you fly a beam onto the ground. That's what your Cat 2 and your different categories of ILS are for. They're not. The GPS will get you to the outer marker, or even to the middle marker. They'll get you to the point you can intercept the beam and ride the beam to the ground. Now, if your lateral and vertical positioning is off because the GPS signal has dropped out or become degraded, then yeah, maybe you might be far enough off track that you might impact things, but your terrain clearance has those waypoints have degrees of terrain clearance built into them. There are those approach plates, those approach paths are surveyed based on whether you're coming inbound or outbound from a beacon or from a waypoint. Therefore, the closer you get, the more accurate your positioning is going to be. Vertical terrain clearance. If it's a airfield with a tower, they'll have their radar terrain clearance charts overlaid, and so they'll be issuing terrain clearance based on radar return. They shouldn't be issuing terrain clearance based on ADS-B or other secondary radar returns. It could be returning on a primary paint at that point. If you're close enough to the ground that you're going to impact it, then and you're approaching an airfield that has a tower, they're going to likely have radar guidance available. If you're flying a GPS approach into an uncontrolled airfield or something like that, okay, maybe. But again, there should be enough information in the approach plates or in the approach data that you are fully aware of the obstacles in the vicinity. That's just, again, laziness on behalf of the crew. And it's an inflammatory statement that fundamentally has very little bearing on reality, so to speak. But why put it out? Why put the article out? Well, I reckon it's carrying a message, not so much about the GPS jamming and things like that. It's to keep the public wound up about belligerence in Ukraine. I don't think it helps. It's not accurate. I mean, there is accurate elements within this article, but the blatant propagandizing and rhetoric takes away from the actual valid points. If I can't believe this element of what's being said, if I can see that they're continually pointing back to the same source for multiple days, why should I believe that the new material being introduced is valid or carries the same weight? Boy who cried wolf, maybe. Last time there was a plane crash which killed political leaders in Europe. It wasn't GPS's fault. Pilot error. That was the crash of the Polish aircraft attending the Catton Wood massacre commemorations, where basically the pilots were told to land no matter what, despite the fact they said that it was not suitable to land in. And so they had a controlled flight into terrain because they lost positional accuracy because they couldn't see the ground and the workload and everything else. There wasn't a failure of GPS or anything. GPS didn't stop them from flying into the ground. It was pilot error. And so this stuff isn't going to change that. Doesn't change that. I mean, in hindsight, the captain should have exerted his captain's authority and likely would have been no longer allowed to fly again. But as captain of the airframe, had authority to tell the politicians on board that no, they were not going to land at that airfield and that they're going to go to the alternate. That's the whole reason these policies and procedures apply. All right. Now I'm going to get off my well-positioned in 3D space horse